A vessel crafted by engineers from the Caldari Navy that was based on the design of the Merlin-class frigate, the Hookbill was regarded initially as the black sheep of the Caldari frigates until a recent technical review of its blueprint by Lydie. Typically deployed as an assault platform that deals tremendous amounts of damage via 3 sets of arbalest-based launcher hardpoints, the Hookbill is easily switched between light missile and rocket configurations. Coupled with relatively light chassis and reasonable maximum velocity, the Hookbill's missile systems give significant versatility and fantastic damage application in combat at both short and long ranges. Outside of its military application, the Hookbill is often used by private military contractors, PMCs, and independent capsuleers in roles that include bounty hunting, escort duties, and non-covert visual scouting ahead of larger task forces. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use the Caldari Navy Hookbill in Abyssal Deadspaces, notably those of the dark variety. Ahoy there folks, I'm Captain Benzie and I'm a huge fan of the smaller ships in EVE Online, notably the frigates. I love that high-speed playstyle, I love how cheap these vessels can be. I'm also a huge fan of Abyssal Deadspaces, and so combining those two is something that I really enjoy. I love the high-speed playstyle of frigates and how that works in the Dead Space environment, and you can actually make some really solid ISK with this. Now the Caldari Navy Hookbill is not the best starting point for Abyssal Deadspaces. If you're a missile pilot looking to get started in these, then you might want to consider something like the Kestrel first of all, to learn the ropes of how Abyssal Deadspaces work and start understanding missiles. The Hookbill, however, does provide an excellent midpoint between the Kestrel and the Caldari Hawk assault frigate that does require slightly fewer skills, so this is an excellent stepping stone between those as you start to skill towards the Hawk. It does have a lot of uses outside of Abyssal Deadspaces. It's quite popular in faction warfare, for example, but for today we're going to be focusing on using this in dark Abyssal Deadspaces. I'm going to showcase how this works, how you can fit it, and how you can have fun flying this in those environments and making a decent amount of ISK. Now before we jump into an in-depth look at the fit that we're going to be using, it is worth spending a few moments to talk about dark Abyssal Deadspaces in general. If you already understand Abyssal Deadspaces pretty well, I will put a timestamp in the description that you can skip ahead just to the fit. But let's talk about the dark Abyssal Deadspaces. Now all Abyssal Deadspaces apply a set of penalties and bonuses to all ships in there, both the player ship and the enemies that you're going to be fighting. And dark Abyssal Deadspaces are unique on the penalties in that they do not apply a resistance penalty. If you go into an electrical dead space, for example, it's a negative reduction to electromagnetic resistances, therefore you use electromagnetic weaponry to exploit that hole. Darks don't have that, which means you do need to be aware of the enemy resistance types and be willing to swap your ammunition for a faster clear time. That is worth noting first of all. Now the penalty for dark Abyssal Deadspaces instead of a resistance drop is a drop to turret optimal and fall off range. Now we're not going to be using turrets, but the enemies will be. Now the AI in Abyssal Deadspaces doesn't actually account for this particularly well. They still try to fly using their basic optimal and fall off, so we can exploit the hell out of this in order to outrange our opponents and minimize the amount of damage we take. They're going to be trying to keep their usual ranges. We can go just a little bit further than that and make sure that our light missiles are still applying full damage from range whilst we take very little back. Now, on the other side of things, the bonus for an Abyssal Deadspace of the dark variety is a 50% bonus to maximum velocity, so we are going to be going significantly faster than we would be otherwise. And it is worth now spending a brief moment to talk about the tachyon clouds in dark Abyssal Deadspaces. Now, tachyon clouds are the white clouds that you may have seen inside various rooms of Abyssal Deadspaces, and what they do is they quadruple your flight velocity whilst halving your inertia modifier. Now this can give you a very sudden burst of speed, and it is all too common for I've discovered that players will fly into these, get a sudden burst of speed and a drop to their inertia, and just whiz off out of the arena into the damaging zone outside. A lot of deaths in dark Abyssal Spaces happen to people who just happen to slingshot themselves straight out of the arena and then can't get back inside in time before that deals massive damage to them whilst they're also being shot at by enemies. enemies. This is particularly notable with the Charybdis that likes to go right to the edge of the arena, and you are going to have to orbit that very quickly anyway, so it's very easy to be trying to close the gap on that, getting towards the edge of an arena, hitting a tachyon cloud, and just flying all the way out, panicking because you're now out of the arena and taking damage, and that Charybdis just gets a wrecking shot off on you and finishes you off nicely. But with all of that said then, let's jump into talking about the fit. Now, because we're going into a dark Abyssal Deadspace and thus going up against enemies with shorter turret ranges, we can exploit this by using light missiles. So that's what I've gone for a full rack here at the top. Light missile launcher 2s, and I do recommend not flying the Hookbill until you've got the capability to fit Tech 2 equipment. Again, this is a nice stepping stone between something lower like a Kestrel and something higher like a Hawk. You can use this to do cheap runs, get an understanding of what's going on as your skills increase, and then eventually, once you're skilled high enough, that's when you move into something like the Hawk. But light missile launcher 2s here, I've got a load of Fury light missiles in here. These ones shown are Infernos, but I do carry a full load of Infernos, Mjolnirs, Scourge, and Nova to make sure that I can exploit whatever my enemy's resistances are and get through that resistance hole and deal faster damage for faster clear times. It is well worth noting that in Dark Abyssal Deadspaces, because they do not affect the resistances, you don't just have one hole to shoot for, you instead need to actually learn what your enemy's resistances are. But with the Fury light missiles here, Tech 2 ammo, which we can put in here because we're using Tech 2 launches, 41 kilometer maximum flight range. This is actually going to be outside the range of a lot of the smaller ships inside these Abyssal Deadspaces, so we can orbit at 30, 40, 20 kilometers and be out of the range of most of the damage coming in on us, whilst still dealing good application directly back to them. Well worth remembering. That's the playstyle we're going for here, kind of a semi-kiting fit. Now for the mid slots here, because we are a Caldari ship, we're going to be going shield tanking, and I do honestly prefer an active tank on this to going for a passive tank. I think the active tank just works better. It does mean we have to make some concessions for capacitor, but well, you'll see this works pretty well. Let's simulate and talk about the details. So first of all, we are using a small shield booster 2. This is going to allow us to repair any damage that our shields take whilst we're inside this Abyssal Deadspace, and a enduring multispectrum shield hardener is going to increase our resistances across the board in order to just reduce that damage to begin with. You can see that with this active, our lowest resistances are 41 and 46 on thermal and electromagnetic, so you do have to be careful against any enemies that are doing that kind of damage, but we have pretty respectful kinetic resistance of 56 and 64 explosive damage resistance, which does again reduce that damage really quite nicely. Now, of course, shield tanking, as I mentioned, is quite harsh on your capacitor, so we do need to find some ways to help stabilize that. That is going to start with a Eutectic compact cap recharger, and that's a very difficult thing to say at speed. Eutectic compact cap recharger, just to help our capacitor recharge faster, and we have a small compact lead acid cap battery in order to, again, just help things go a little bit smoother with our capacitor. Now, if you find that you have more power grid than, like, you are using more CPU, etc., you can swap these for the Tech 2 variants if you wish, mess with the fit and get it to work according to what skills you have. This is just a nice, cheap and easy way that sort of applies that middle stepping stone between the Kestrel and the Hawk. We do want some kind of propulsion. Again, I've gone for a 1 meganewton YS8 compact afterburner. A lot of people go for micro warp drives, but that penalty to your capacitor I find really messes with the SIG tank, and having a 50% flight velocity bonus anyway for being inside a dark abyssal, I honestly think that the afterburner is more than sufficient for this, and it means you don't run quite as much risk of slingshotting yourself out of the arena using a tachyon cloud. Finally, with our low slots, I've gone for 2 Crosslink compact ballistic control systems. This just increases our damage. More damage means faster clear times means more ISK per hour. Nice and simple. Again, you can upgrade these two, the ballistic control system 2s if you have the skills for those, and you have the power grid still available in order to fit all of those. For the rigs, I've gone for a small processor overclocking unit ×2, just to give us that little bit more space to fit some of these modules in there, plus a small electromagnetic shield reinforcer just to help plug this gap. Again, you do often see people trying to go for damage bonuses on ships that are running Abyssal Deadspaces, and that's absolutely fine, but I do recommend starting with some tanking fits first of all, seeing how much damage you take and whether or not that can survive, then tweaking to increase your damage afterwards. Make sure you can survive the dead space before you try to improve your clear times. It's important that you can survive it before you start worrying about going for faster clear times. Now with this fit, we're getting a solid 140.2 DPS, a decent amount of volley strike on that, like good amount of alpha strike on that in fact. Other than that, we've got very fast flight velocity. We're starting there all the way up at 1090.4. Remember, that's actually going to be close to 1500 once we're in the Abyssal Deadspace thanks to the 50% bonus to flight velocity. This gives us an excellent ship that is very maneuverable, can stay at range, deal good amounts of damage and clear those rooms fairly quickly. So let's actually run a calm, dark Abyssal Deadspace to showcase this in action, and I do apologise a little bit for the choppy frame rate. Not entirely sure what was going on there, because normally my computer runs these at full spec no problem whilst recording. So room 1, we've got a load of Tessellas, a big load of Tessellas. That's a lot of damage if they all start shooting us in one go. So I'm going to lock onto the biocompetitive cache. I'm going to start to orbit that, which I've got set as a default of 20 kilometers, which is going to put us a decent amount of range. We put the Multispectrum shield hardener on and the Afterburner, and you can see we're going 1,600 meters per second here. Nice fast speeds, taking very little damage, and we are still well and truly in range of all of these enemies. Tessellas are fast. They're going to try and keep up with us, and they're going to actually stick to us fairly well. So we're not worried too much about the range here, but we want to make sure that we're able to shoot stuff whilst keeping a bit of distance going on there. While maneuvering through the room, we're not going to worry about outranging something. I have killed the biocompetitive here first. I've then set to loot on it, because this now means I can manually pilot. I've got the loot, everything's okay. We're going nice and fast, so I'm fairly hard to hit from the Tessellas. You can see I'm getting lots of misses in that here. Now, as we fly through, we do the whole hammer click, 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 loot all. We then pick something else in the distance to start flying towards, in this case, one of the extra boxes to go for there. This means we can start flying towards it, again hopefully take a little bit less damage. I've got the shield booster running now because as I slowed down there I took a decent amount of damage, but it's nothing that our shields can't handle, and as soon as we're moving at speed again, the damage has been reduced. Again, I keep getting little mini lag spikes. That means as I'm hitting the buttons sometimes, it's not actually activating the weapon system, which is why, like right now, the light missiles were offline for quite a few seconds there. Normally, obviously, you'd go a little bit faster there. I came a little bit too close to that extra box, so I'm manually piloting away from it for the moment just to deal some damage so I can then lock onto it and close that distance. I don't want to just bounce off the rock and sit there, because then I will take massive amounts of damage from these Tessellas. There we are, with the extraction node all sorted, we can now lock onto that, move closer, launch some missiles at it, which should kill it in the one volley. Hopefully. There it goes, and then again we hit loot on it, open cargo, so that we don't slow down too much. We have a little bit of a slowdown, but then we're flying straight towards that wreckage again in order to loot it and get out of there quickly. I'm also planning at this point where we're going to be going for next, and it's going to be the other extraction node, so we'll get ready to move on to that. Again, mouse over where the loot all button is and start hammering the click as we get into range. Click, 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 loot all, and the second we bounce, I can queue and click on the other the extraction node there to start moving towards it. Important that we are always moving, otherwise we are going to be taking extraordinary amounts of damage. One more Tessella there to lock onto, and I can start shooting at these as I move towards the extraction node. And you'll see, again, there are times when I do take a bit of damage from these, but it's nothing that the shield booster can't keep up with, and the light missiles, despite their long cycle time, are actually doing a decent whack of damage to these as well per strike. All the way there, pretty much from full shields to half armor in one strike. Second load go off there, and the fortunate thing is that these are close enough to me as well that the long flight time doesn't mean, and the long activation time means that I'm not running the risk of accidentally launching a load of missiles at something that is gone from the previous volley. Again, here we get that wonderful little bit of lag. You'll see that I've got different things targeted, but my missiles seem to not be launching at them. So we're going to try one more time. Launch missiles here at the extraction node. That should kill it, and it kills the Tesella in the distance. For some reason, I don't know why that happened. You can clearly see that I'm targeting the extraction node. Heck, the missiles are all flying towards it, but they don't appear to be damaging it, so I'm not actually sure what's going on here. Suddenly, the other Tesella is taking damage, and yeah, there is a tower here that will be doing that as well, because these are rogue drones, but I don't know why that happened. But there we are. Right, we can loot everything, and now we start moving towards the transfer conduit. Hopefully we should be able to kill everything else before we get there. You can see they're taking damage from that tower because they're flying near it, and taking that little additional bit of damage. Remember, if you've got a room full of rogue drones, you can like lead them through some of the towers, and they will take additional damage from those as well. Of course, if you're using your own drone ship, which isn't a worry here, of course, we don't have drones on the Hookbill, those will take damage as well. If you're worried what those are called, that's the Deviant Automata Suppressors. Those do a decent amount of damage to like any drones, whether it is your own drones or whether it is rogue drone frigates going through them. So with rooms with Tesellas, you can actually fly close to those towers, and the Tesellas will just take additional damage from those towers, which is a pretty good tip. If you come into a room with a cloud of Tesellas and one of those towers in the center, you can kind of just closely orbit it and lead them into that damage area. On to room number 2. This time we have 3 of the Ephialtes Lancer cruisers. Again, we're going to go after the biocompetitive cache first, just so we can get that out of the way. I like to be trying to loot as I go, because that gives you faster clear times. Again, the missiles have launched, but not hit the loot cache at all, but second volley now gets it. So again, we open up the loot, we go to open cargo, we fly towards this. I accidentally started orbit there, which could have been really bad because it slowed me right the heck down and changed my angular and traversal velocity, but we're okay. Right, so we come closer, click, 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 as we go through to make sure that we loot all. We then pick a new direction and start to orbit. I'm using keyboard shortcuts here of W and click to do my default orbit, which in this case is currently set to 20 kilometers. Because I had the search bar clicked though, I've typed W into the search rather than actually orbiting. Do be careful of this with keyboard shortcuts. It's a problem. If you're clicking any of the boxes that you have on your user interface, you need to click back into space just to click off those so that your keybinds suddenly work. It's caught me many, many times in this kind of thing. Right, so we're going to Q-click now to approach the extraction node. Last thing we need to kill here, for loot at least wise. So we're going to approach that, we're going to launch missiles at it. Again, they don't seem to be damaging. I'm not sure what's going on here, but again, we get it. We're going to open cargo so that we are keeping moving, and then start to shoot one of these Lancers as we approach. Remember, we've got 41 kilometer range, which means these things sitting at 18 kilometers, we're fine. And we're taking almost no damage at all. And I've just left the shield booster running because we are cap stable with it running. I've got no problems with this at all. Once I've killed these and I'm moving towards the gate, I can turn the shield booster off and just be regenerating capacitor at that point in time there. Cool, so now we're going to start to orbit this Ephialtes Lancer. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. I don't actually know how you pronounce that one. It's a bit of an interesting ship name, but there we go. I think it's a cool ship name as well. We're going to orbit at range, get some nice footage here of the Hookbill doing its thing. Again, I seem to have deactivated the missiles. Takes me a second to realise that, but off we go. Look at the background there. How cool is that? I love Abyssal Deadspaces. They are so, so pretty. Oh, and that other Ephialtes nearly crashes into us on its own orbit. If only crash damage was a thing in EVE Online, right? But there we go. We can now move to starting to orbit the other Lancer, so that first one, as it dies, again, we don't have to suddenly change direction. We're preparing ahead of time. We are now orbiting, activate the missiles. Beautiful explosions from these ships. I love those blue sort of plasma explosions. So pretty. I've said it before, I will genuinely say it many, 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 many times. Abyssal Deadspaces are some of my favourite things in EVE Online, not just because they're fun, not because they're good ISK, not because they're actually challenging and have high risk to high reward, which I love. I'm one of these weirdos who genuinely, I don't want to do something if it's not risky. Like, for me, wormhole ratting is more fun than high-sec ratting. Even if they were the same amount of ISK, I'd want to do the wormhole one, because the wormhole one carries actual risk to it, and that gets my blood pumping. But Abyssal Deadspaces, in addition to being fun, high risk, high reward, they are just beautiful. Like, look at this in the background there. It's stunning, those sort of crystallized asteroids, that skybox behind it all, the clouds, the towers, everything about them. It's just visually stunning, and I love it to pieces. But here we are, we should be just about to finish off this Lancer. It's taken a bit of time, so I'm going to start approaching now towards the transfer conduit to move into room 3. Again, we're just going to keep the camera down there because I love these explosions. Come on, wait for it. Boof, look at that. Look at those beautiful explosions. And the Caldari Navy Hookbill as well. Quite an interesting looking ship. I don't like the propulsion unit at the back, but seen from the front, I love it. I love the Merlin hull anyway, so it's got that kind of aesthetic to it. I just don't like how much the propulsion unit sticks out of the back. Final room, aha, Charybdis Tyrannos. This is the one you need to be careful with in dark Abyssal Deadspaces because this will move towards the edge of the arena. It's essentially a battleship that's going to drift towards the edge of the arena to try and, you know, outrange you. Ultimately, again, our speed means we can actually close orbit quite nicely. I've set the orbit to 20 because then I come in at sort of that angle of 20. Once I've got closing in on that, I set to the 5-kilometer orbit that I actually want against this one, so that I've got a very high traversal around this ship so that its tracking suffers to hit me. Don't just approach and try and orbit at 5,000 immediately because you have low traversal on that approach. You're going to take massive damage if this thing hits you. So I go in for a wider approach and I kind of spiral inwards on the Tyrannos. That keeps my angular velocity right up, which means I am hard to track. Now that I'm going at 5 kilometers, orbiting at sort of 5 to 7 kilometers around it, I am much harder to hit. And I can just sit here with the shield booster running comfortably now. I am cycling it because it gives me something to do, but ultimately I'm just going to sit here and slowly kill this Charybdis. Even though it's got almost no shields, no armor, and it's almost halfway through hull, it still takes a good beating to finally finish it off. Now that we are getting a little bit closer to that dying, I'm going to pull a little bit of range. Really bad timing there. That could have been really nasty if that had got the wrecking shot, which happens more than you might think. But the reason I want to keep these sort of tight orbits is so that I can see what's going on around me. I've got that good traversal, and I'm keeping aware of whether or not that there is a tachyon cloud nearby, because again, even if I'm orbiting, if I hit one of those at speed, that sudden increase to your flight velocity, 4 times flight velocity, takes us up to like 6,000 meters per second in this ship. And there's the cloud there in the distance. Oh, no, it's a blue one. It's fine. It's a blue one. Ultimately, that sudden speed boost plus the reduction in inertia, meaning you suddenly hit that speed faster, can be enough to slingshot even an orbit well and truly out of the arena. But it's okay, we've got there the Charybdis about to go down. I'm now orbiting the biocompetitive cache, because the Charybdis itself is close enough to that it's not going to change anything. We're now going to go for that cache, do the looting, and then go for the Ephialtes Lancer to finish off this dead space. And again, just look at that background, how pretty these are. What an explosion there you get from that one as well. That sort of green, almost gaseous cloud. The explosions in EVE Online are genuinely some of my favourite things, and I think if you're the kind of person who enjoys explosions, this really can be the game for you. But click, 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 as we go through the biocompetitive cache, grab all of that loot, and we're going to start moving towards the extraction nodes, whilst still shooting at the Lancer. And again, look at that asteroid, those crystalline structures with the blue cloud there. Beautiful. And I'm not too worried. Now, the Lancers, obviously, you shouldn't really fly straight towards them or straight away. They are, that does reduce your angular velocity. But it's not proving too much of a problem here being in a dark. So I think these ones are actually using missiles anyway, so we're fine with that. But just be aware that obviously don't fly in a line straight away from something if it's using turrets, because that's going to give them much higher probability to shoot you. So we've destroyed the extraction node. We're going to loot the extraction node, get rid of everything out of the search box. There we are, loot, 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 loot. We're getting within 10 kilometers. We're going to bounce off the rock, of course, but that's unavoidable at this rate without some rather extreme manual piloting. Not too worried about it. We're going to start moving towards that final extraction node as we take out that last Lancer. And there we go. That is the Abyssal Deadspace done. I can now just approach this final box here. We're going to loot everything out of that. Nice and easy. Just enjoy that scenery. Oh, beautiful. And the second that we lock and loot, get ready for the loot, get ready for the loot. There we are, grab the loot. We're now going to approach and enter the origin conduit and exit this dead space. And it's at this point that I'm actually going to just slow boat towards this. Well, not slow boat, I'm using an afterburner. But I'm going to fly towards this, I'm going to turn off the UI and actually take some nice camera shots. Well, some of these you might recognize as the thumbnail for this video. That's how I do it. Anyway, folks, there it is. Caldari Navy Hookbill doing a Abyssal Deadspace, Dark type Abyssal Deadspace pretty quickly, pretty easily. No real risk there at all in this particular run. Most of the ships that you go up against are pretty easy to take care of because anything that's using turrets tends to be your biggest threat, and those turrets are just weaker because, well, it's a Dark Abyssal Deadspace, right? Well worth trying. If you are running a Kestrel to start with and you're looking for something to tie you over that's a bit more ISK per hour before going into the Hawk, this is an excellent ship exactly for that. You can see there we're looking at nearly 7 million ISK loot from that one Abyssal Deadspace. Decent ISK from that, not bad at all. Something to tie you over between the Kestrel and going for something like the Hawk, which is one of my preferred ships for running Abyssal Deadspaces, and absolutely something I intend to do a video on in the very near future. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit like on it. If you fancy seeing that Hawk video when it launches, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. If you're interested in playing EVE Online, if you're not playing already and you're just watching these for the fun, I do have a referral link in the description down below. You can also use that on existing accounts. It will give you 1 million skill points completely free. Excellent way to start your career in EVE Online. Anyway, folks, thanks for watching right the way through to the end. Happy sailing, and see you in New Eden!